Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's Ed. Just wanted to stop by and really talk about the Tab XC. Now, I know I had promised a video on when I used it for grading, and I did film that video. Unfortunately, that's when I was having trouble with my audio, and the audio was unusable. So I had this, not a huge video, but a pretty decent sized video talking about how I set that up and what my use case I thought was going to be. And then with the bad audio, I ended up backtracking, and I wanted to kind of do a post-mortem and talk about what it actually was. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Tab XC. I'm going to use one of my old papers that I wrote as an example of how I would mark up a paper using the Tab XC and tell you why the workflow I originally intended didn't really work, and why I think that I'm having a little bit of a struggle with this device because of what I use it for. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not useful for someone, and I will talk about the cases where I think it would be, but I also want to be very clear as to why I used it, and I used it to grade about 30 papers, and it worked, but it wasn't my favorite experience. I much preferred the Note Max. Without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump in and I will show you what I did. All right, so here we are with the Tab XC, and I've got this obviously in very good lighting conditions. I do have the front light on just to make sure that you can see all of this legibly, but I'm taking one of my papers, and originally my thought process and my use case was going to be that I would have the handwriting tools all set up and I would be able to go ahead and mark the document up. And then if I wanted to embed comments, I would use the keyboard case, and that's why I have it in this current configuration. Obviously, it would start closed like this, and then I would be able to open it up and write on it. The issue I ran into right out of the gate was the fact that I had to have a space this big, or I had to put this behind it. So you can see it's very heavy inside the keyboard case. And of course here, now you've got this big gap. When you turn this thing on its side, you can see just how thick that is. And that made it very difficult to be able to write on because your hand can't comfortably, and you can see accidental touches right away. I did turn off the bottom gestures because they were just wreaking havoc. And that happens on the Note Max as well. So it's not just this device, but anything where you're going to be resting your palm is really going to cause you an issue with those gestures. But one thing that I found immediately that I needed to address was the fact, first of all, if you go in here, you have to click the pen if you want to change anything. And then, of course, you have all of your different colors. Now, most of you know I don't like to use a red pen. Matter of fact, I hate it. Just a holdover from when I was in school. The red pen was always very intimidating to me, so I prefer blue. And the nice thing about on the Note Max is that even if you are using monochrome, which you are, you can still write and then pick a color for that to come out of. Same with the Super Note. If you write, you can export to blue or red or black. I always export to blue. But this was a pretty decent experience once I would take it out of the case. So I kind of found myself in an interesting position. Originally, the thought was I would write some notes here, and then I would make a few comments, and then let's say we go into the paper, and now I want to press this, and then I get the handlebars, and I can go ahead and let's say I want to talk about this whole paragraph. And then here's where I can do my embedded comments. Now, I still maintain that BOOX's implementation of the handwriting keyboard is probably best in class. Now, the Supernote one I absolutely love, but the handwriting recognition occasionally does get it wrong. I think their handwriting recognition on BOOX is just better. So let's say here I want to say, great point, solid introduction. And of course, I wouldn't say this about my own work, but that's what I'm using for the example. And then you'll see that that's going to pull right in. Great point, solid introduction, and I can hit update. Now, when I go into that, I'm going to be able to see that comment if I go back in. And it's going to be there. And the student on the other end would be able to see that same comment in any Adobe Reader, so it works really well. Now, the handles aren't as great. That part's a little hard. Now, they do have where I can underline this and do it on one line. The problem there is it's really hard to get it to recognize multiple lines. So if I go here, see, it's not going to do anything. I have to use that one line to make that work. So just a little thing that you have to get used to, and then I can scribble erase and get rid of that. But not a deal breaker at all. It's just that the handles can get a little bit fidgety occasionally, and it automatically pulls up the definition and everything. You get all of the tools. I mean, that's what Books does, is they give you all of the tools. So you can do anything you want here. You can underline, you can bold, you can highlight, you can change the color of the highlights, you can copy, paste, share, link. You can do so many things right from within this menu. So it really is a powerful tool. But my original use case was that when I got to this point, and when I was going to do my embedded comments, I thought, well, let's make use of the keyboard case. So in that case, I would pull this back up, and then I would go ahead and connect my keyboard. Now it would automatically rotate, which it does. And I apologize, I don't have a top-down shot for this, but this is what I would do. And so the idea being that I could press on that, or I could highlight that. I could go ahead, I could go in here, and now I could expand, and I could say, you could improve this by adding a primary source. And what you can't see here is there is a little bit of lag, which is weird. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens occasionally when I connect the keyboard, and then it tends to smooth out over time, and it's an excellent typing experience once it smooths out. So it's really good. So, and I had one typo that was just me. So now when I hit update, that will go ahead and save that comment. So that was my original thought. My original thought was to do it that way, and that way I could type much faster than I could write. The problem that came in was this thing is so clunky and so heavy and so thick that I found it was much faster for me to just handwrite the annotations, which is what I traditionally do. So I ended up going back to the regular cover. I would do that primarily is because of this. Obviously, without a cover, there's nothing to keep this from going around and having issues. Now, the reason I love this size of a device, and I can do this on a 10-inch device, but it's not as easy, is being able to write in the margins. So for some things, I would do what you just saw. I'll put in my comments, I'll add those in so they're embedded. Somebody who's reading that PDF can read my comments. But then I might want to say, you know what, this whole paragraph is exceptional. And so I would write a line here and let it snap. And then I would put excellent use of sources. So the idea being that I can make that a real flowing document. And I can also do that here. I could say something at the bottom like, this needs some work. And I can have that there. And then as I go through the document, I can continue doing that, adding in highlights, adding in comments. Maybe if I've already mentioned that they shouldn't use a contraction or there was a problem with citations, then I could actually, instead of putting a comment in here, I could just make this a highlight. And so we could just take that right there. And that's where I mentioned that, the highlight can be a little bit of an issue. But there it is. So then I could just go ahead and write out whatever I needed to, making notes in the margins with different things. And it just really works well. Now, one thing that I tend to do at the end, and we'll go ahead to the last page here, and you'll see how fast. One thing about this specific device is it is super speedy fast. So it just works really well. So for example, I get to the end of the paper, and one thing I do like to do, and I also turn this into text and put it in the comments in Canvas, which is the LMS I use, but I also like to handwrite it. So I would say, in this case, it's my paper. So we'll go into the pen. And then we'll say, John, this was a really good paper. And then you just say, see notes throughout. And then you just keep writing all the way down. So I like to have that handwritten touch. And then what I do is I upload the entire PDF back to the student so they get all of that. They get the handwriting in the margins. They get all of the different components as far as the comments that are embedded. They get the narrative at the end telling them what they got right. Plus, I also go in and use the rubric in the learning management system to really give them a rounded idea of what they've gotten right and what they've gotten wrong. So that's my use case for this. Now, I will say that I did not keep the healing shield on this. I put a healing shield on this because of the fact that this is a very glassy, smooth surface, and that is not something I really enjoy. I like the way the Note Max feels, but at the same time, what it did was it started to wear this nib very, very fast. And I didn't want to have that issue because, I'm grading 30 papers, so I'm going to be writing a whole lot in here. And with that being the case, I didn't want to have to constantly change out my nib because I could see it starting to wear already, and it just was not going to be a good experience. Not really a fault of the device, but at the same time, I also want to use this in the environment with which it was intended. When I used the Note Max, I didn't alter the device at all. So why should I alter this one just to make it better? I didn't do that for that reason. I thought it was really important that I present the device to you in what its meant to be used form was. And hopefully that makes a little bit of sense as far as that goes. My use case is the fact that I grade mostly papers with a few charts or with a few tables in them at most, no real charts, no colors. So for me, this would be overkill in a lot of ways. However, depending on what I was grading, if I did have someone who was turning in with a lot of pie charts, bar charts, things that required color, this would be almost a must-have if I was going to grade the way I grade. And I think it's really important to take that into consideration and to understand what that use case is. So, for example, if I go in and I go into one of my older, I got to go this way. That's the one thing about books that does drive me a little crazy. So I have to disable the bottom gestures on this so that I don't accidentally close the page, which happens all the time. But then I have to go out of this writing toolbar, and then I have to go to the exit button in this secondary toolbar, and then I have to confirm to get out. So that's a little bit of a pain. But at the same time, I understand it. And of course, I've used Bloom's taxonomy for a long time as far as showing off color because it fits most into my use case. And again, here you can see I've done some blue highlights. There's also some blue annotations all throughout. And I also get this color representation here. So if a student had turned something in and I wanted to draw attention to it, of course, I could draw that line and have that be something that I could use. But it also gives you that differentiation here from the different levels of blooms. So again, if you are somebody who needs color to be able to differentiate and to see what the students are trying to convey, this is going to be very important. It's going to be very important to you. It's going to be very important to them with the feedback, because if you don't understand what they're trying to get across, it's going to cause more issues than it's going to solve. So for me, this was a nice to have, but not a real necessity as far as the color piece. And you do lose some of I think it's the comfort of writing on the Note Max, because this is a very slick writing experience, even with the haptics turned on a little bit like I have them, versus more of a tactile feel that you get with an EMR pen. It's not bad. This is actually a decent stylus and it works really well, but the issue becomes that it just isn't comfortable to write at long settings with. And there's no button on it, which again, that I'm not a huge fan or non-fan of the button because the scribble erase works really well for me. You'll see it takes it right off. It recognizes it really well. So for me, this is still acceptable. Is it the best writing experience? No. Is this exactly what my handwriting looks like? No. I can tell the difference, especially around the E's and around some, like it misses the dots over the I a lot of the time. So I can tell. Is it something that everybody's going to notice? Probably not. Are my students going to pay so much attention over whether or not my E's look beautiful? No, they're not. But I see it, and it's a little bit of an inconvenience for me. But overall, I'll say that had I been able to use this the way I wanted to by switching easily between typing and handwriting, I think it would have been a phenomenal experience. And quite frankly, I think I would have used that same workflow, but only on the Note Max, because of the fact that that's the best way for me to grade is by using the black and white monochrome and being able to export with that blue. So again, take it for what you will, but that's been my experience in grading with this. And I think that it's worth talking about. But for the person who needs color, for the professor or the teacher who's having to mark up papers where color is something they have to be able to read, interpret, and see, this is a no-brainer of a device. This and the Note Max are the only devices in the game at this size format. And I think that you could get some of that functionality out of the 10.3 or 10.65 inch devices, but it's still going to be a little bit of a compromise because you're going to have to go into landscape and you're going to have to kind of make it work. And maybe at some point I'll do a comparison between the Note Max and the Super Note Manta and how I grade on each one of those, because I still use the Manta sometimes to grade papers because of the way that they handle splitting up the pages in landscape, and it works really well. But this is just so much easier with this size of a device. All right, well, that's my take on it. Wanted to walk you through that, let you know that I did use this device as I promised I would. I wish that other video hadn't completely tanked as far as audio because I had two cameras and I was kind of showing the setup process, but I think I got to the gist of it here. So let's go ahead and jump back over and I will close out and give you some final thoughts. All right, everybody. So thanks for hanging in there on that. Like I said, originally I had done it with a little bit of a different view of things, but also that was a setup video. So that was me talking about what I was going to do more so than what I did. And in this video, what we did was we went through and we talked about what I actually did. So how did I use this device? In what ways did it really work? In what ways did it not? What were the pain points? What were the friction points? And to me, this is an exceptional device. On its own or in the flipbook cover, it's fairly light for the size it is, both it and the Note Max. Once you put it in that keyboard case, though, it becomes a monstrosity and a behemoth in a lot of ways. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just it feels more like a laptop at that point, and it feels like it really needs to exist in the typing mode, if that makes sense. It feels that way. And to me, that's one of the downsides to the way that BOOX has implemented the typing case. It's not as bad on the Note Air 5C because of the way that case functions a little bit, but it's still very chunky. And I think this implementation doesn't lend itself to being as user-friendly as it should. And so I really hope they can, in the future, improve that in that keyboard case and make it so maybe the keys fold up, something like you see on Remarkable, because I think that would really help the experience and make it much easier to use it for the workflow that I intended to use it for. But overall, love this device. I really do. Not as big a fan of the active capacitive stylus, but that's been well documented. I've talked about it before. The bigger thing is not having that writing surface. This pen is not bad. It's probably one of the better optimized active styluses I've ever used. Very similar to the new InkSense Plus that's on the Go 10.3 Gen 2s. It works well. The biggest issue is the fact that there's no writing surface, and quite frankly, the haptic motor just doesn't do much. And if you turn it up too high, you actually get kind of a whiny sound, which doesn't do anybody any good. So those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Also, let me know what you think of the new setup. I've got a couple of different views I'll be experimenting with. I redid my entire desk layout just to see if I could get and maximize my space a little bit more, but interested in your thoughts and your use cases for a device like this. Am I way off base? Do you have to have color when you grade? Do you have to see it in real time as you're marking things up as far as color? Or is it more a nice to have? Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Please use my affiliate links if you can at no extra cost to you. And until next time, keep moving forward and I will talk to you soon. Bye now.